All right, guys, you enjoyed that last video so much, I thought I'd make another one. We're gonna do more car parts, wheels and carburetor, seats, and a shovel. Let's do it. Let's try it on this metal. This is 19 gauge, pretty thin Volkswagen metal. All right, those are some pretty interesting results. It's getting down to the bare metal, and I turned it down to 50% right here after I took some of the initial stuff off, and it still cleaned it pretty good. If you look closely, you can kind of see there's still a little bit of paint and rust on here. It's basically just making these lines back and forth, cutting through it. And at some point, it gets down to the metal. It's not as nice and clean as sandblasting or using a DA with 80 grit. But it does remove that top layer, which could save you some 80 grit. When you went, you could take the top layer off and then finish it off with some 80 grit. What's cool about it is it can get into these little areas right here and even behind there. I think it's like any tool. It's it's not perfect for everything, but it's definitely useful for a lot of things. This has got sand on it. It's got rust and paint. Let's see what it does to that layer right there. quite a bit of stuff. Turned out pretty good too. I'm pretty excited about it. Let's take a look at this Karmann Ghia hood real quick. Engine lid. I was messing with the intensity, the power, and the frequency a little bit. This was high power. You can kind of see it got right down to the metal pretty quick. Then I did a low power over here. I think this was 25%. What was cool was like right here, it took the surface rust off, and you can see it did go through the paint a little bit. But there was a couple areas where I think it was 25%, and it took the dirt and the rust off, and it barely touched the paint, which was kind of neat. But I generally like it on 100 full power, and because it just kind of eats through everything, gets right down to the metal. This is pretty much bare metal right here. Overall, pretty happy with it. I'm going to break out my DA with some 80 grit in a little bit, and I'll do a quick section on this side just to kind of see what DA with 80 grit would do and how long it would take to get this down to a nice metal finish. There are some things that are just pretty impressive, like this wheel. Now this wheel was previously sandblasted or wire wheeled. I can't remember. I think it was sandblasted a couple of years ago. And then it sat outside, and you can see that rust just kind of took over. So it really works great on surface rust. You can kind of see it. And the other thing that's really cool about it is it just gets in all of these little areas that are kind of hard to get to. That was probably the most impressive result so far. That to me is really nice. I like that. Very happy with that. This result turned out really good too. This is some cab mounts for an old Ford F-250, like this truck right here actually, that I bought for the Swamp Dragon a few years ago. And then they sat outside probably for a couple years now. So these were bare metal from the factory, whoever made them. You can kind of see. I went over this just a couple times. Cleaned it up pretty good. Now there's still some residue on here. You probably have to hit this with the Scotch-Brite or something and knock that off and hit it again. But it knocks a good chunk of it off to where you could probably just hit that with OSPO and be good to go. We did this shovel, which came out pretty good. It was pretty rusty. Pretty happy with that. I even hit the wood a little bit, kind of cleaned some of that off the wood. And again, it's able to get into all the little crevices and areas that are hard to get to. That turned out really nice. So I think we're going to try a couple other different things. Maybe we'll hit half that exhaust and half of that bracket there, and maybe a little bit of that air breather and that flywheel. I'm going to hit this. This is magnesium. This is an old VW case. good. This is a seat out of a 1965 VW Beetle, and you can kind of see it would be pretty difficult to get to all these little pieces. Let's see how it works on the seat. All right, let's take a look at what we've done so far. We got most of the seat cleaned up. I did notice if there's areas where the rust is super thick and there's junk on it, it's best to go with a wire brush and try to knock some of that off. And get that thick junk out of your way. You can kind of see there's still rust under there. So it's kind of just killing that top layer. But if it's real thick like that, you got to kind of go around and knock it off with the brush. So see, it looks like it's done. It's silver, which gives you the appearance it's done, but that's just the burnt rust on top. So there's still rust underneath. That's if it's really, really, really built up rust, which this has some built up rust. Now this area like this right here, you can kind of see right there, it went right to the metal. And you can see the rust on the side. So something like this is really cool for. It's really neat for because it gets in, it hits all those little springs where otherwise you'd be, you know, kind of doing this for hours and hours. You know, if you had a tank big enough to soak this in, that would be an option as well. If you had something like a tank full of that rust eater, whatever. Anyway, you can see here on this side where I went around with the brush and knocked it back. Now you can kind of see that's the bare metal right there. So it did get down to the bare metal right there, but it does kind of create a blockage on top if the rust is really thick. So I already went around and knocked this side down a little bit, and then I went back and hit it again, and you can kind of see it's starting to go away now. So, you know, is that a downfall? I guess it's a little misleading. When you hit it that first time, it looks like it's metal because it's silver. And if it's really thick rust, it's really just burnt rust. So you kind of have to look at it and say, okay, well, there's the metal and there's the rust on top. And you have to knock that real thick stuff off of here. Go back and hit it again. So for stuff that's really, really thick like that, you definitely need to go back and hit it again. Stuff that's surface rust like this is not as much of an issue. Stuff like this, that was surface rust mostly. This thing was fairly clean. It just had a ton of surface rust because it was sitting outside for a couple of years. You can see it cleaned up pretty good. There's still a little rust residue underneath that silver, so that is something to consider depending on what you're working on. That's why we're doing these videos, to kind of give you a better idea of how this thing is working. So the appearance is that is bare metal, and in some areas it is, but in some areas there's still rust underneath. See that right there? That must be bare metal because I don't see any rust popping back through. All right, after hitting it with the wire wheel, you kind of see it helps it get down to the bare metal. probably depending on the intensity, frequency, and the power settings, probably get slightly different results, I would imagine. I'm not seeing any rust now. We are down to bare metal. The layers of that surface rust, as many layers as possible as you can get off. Doing some prep work, possibly, depending on how bad it is. This was pretty bad. There was layers, you know, layers and layers. This is the bottom of the seat, so this is where all the moisture was hanging out. It was really bad in some of these areas. This area is pretty nice. But you can see this area where the rust was just eating away. The moisture was just eating away at it. Overall, the seat's not terrible. So I'm pretty excited to get this cleaned up. I was wondering how I was going to get to all those springs. I was thinking about sandblasting it outside, but now I don't have to. I still got to go over it with the wire wheel in some of these really bad areas. But the springs, for the most part, are pretty good. I might just hit them a little bit with Scotch-Brite. You can go over these and just kind of knock some of this stuff off with the wire wheel or the Scotch-Brite pad, and then hit it again with the laser on some of the areas that are really bad. Some of these areas are pretty clean. So, but yeah, I think we could go over this with the Scotch-Brite real quick, hit it again with the laser, cover it with some OSPO, and let it dry, and then be ready for some epoxy primer and some paint. It's not perfect, you know. Be awesome if they had something like that with sandblasting results. The sandblasting just eats right through the top layers and everything, and gets right down to the metal. As long as you got enough pressure, air pressure, in the proper gun, the proper tip, and the proper media. But I'm still happy with it. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that one. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think about this thing? Would you get one? Is it worth it? Let me know if you have any more questions. All right, guys, we'll see you on the next one. Later.